Okay, so welcome everyone to our first Virtual Tech Days of 2022. It has been some time since our last Tech Day, so we are very excited to be back and get with it with what's happening in the world. Today we are joined by the URIX team who looks after the Peering Toolbox that we will be chatting about and introducing to you as well. With us today, we have Nurani, we have Nina, we have Donal, and we have Bijal. It sounds like a rhyme. They will all do their introductions as we get to them. I would like to give it over to Bijal, who can do a quick intro into URIX and what it's about, and then we will go to Nurani. So again, thank you everyone for joining, especially our panelists. We are all more than happy to have you guys here. And yeah, before I give over to Bijal, just some navigation. So at the bottom of your screen, please, if you have any questions, you can post it into the Q&A. You're welcome to chat to us in the chat, just say hi. And any discussions you would like to have, you can have it in the chat. But again, please, the questions in the Q&A section. And that's about it. So enjoy. And yeah, let's chat together. Over to you, Bijal.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's session on the Peering Toolbox, which is a URIX project. I'm thrilled to be here partnering with NAP Africa and Teraco to be bringing this panel to you today. So I'm not going to introduce anything about the Peering Toolbox because I'm going to let Nurani do it. So hope you all enjoy the session and thank you for joining us. So I'll pass it on to Nurani. Thanks, Nurani.
Thanks, Bijal. Hello, everyone. Lovely to be with you here. So good to see so many faces and so many people registered for the session. I would much rather be there in person, and hopefully that will happen soon again. But for now, we are stuck with this format. But next opportunity I get to come to Africa, I will jump at. I'm here wearing, I'm Nurani Mpuno. I'm the head of global engagement at the London Internet Exchange, but I'm here actually wearing my URIX hat. I sit on the board of the URIX and I'm involved with the Peering Toolbox. And I want to give you a short introduction to this and before we start our discussion with the panels. So really, to put it all in a bit of a context, so maybe 20 years ago, the internet was a little bit more hierarchical in that there were these large transit providers that provided access over to the other side of the internet to smaller providers, content providers, and to enterprise organizations, etc. But today the internet is a lot more complex, apart from the fact that you see a lot of content providers building their own infrastructure. And you see many of these players actually filling many different roles in the internet ecosystem. You can also see that the internet has become an essential part of many organizations' infrastructure. And businesses have also seen an increased focus on this, and they need to optimize their services because they're reliant on the internet for that. So at the URIX, we started talking about this, and it was not actually limited to IXPs. There were quite a few networks like Amazon and Microsoft, and we got together just very informally and talking about how we'd seen more and more newcomers, if you want, join the peering scene. So wanting to connect to IXPs, so wanting to take control over the peering. And we saw that there was this incredibly steep learning curve that was required for anyone who wanted to understand peering. And we saw that enterprises saw that, taking control of the internet traffic, not just their internal infrastructure, but also what was connected to the internet, was becoming increasingly important. But of course, that meant quite a high cost for some of them. There was risk. There was also a lot of competence development required. Some of them have a lot of technical knowledge, but they don't necessarily understand the world of peering. So, and we also understood that some enterprises, once they connected to an IXP, they thought that everything would just flow from that, but they then quickly learned that they actually then have to manage the peering connections. So there was a lot to learn. So means having the right resources, knowing how to get IP addresses and AS numbers, how to manage your peers, and then also actually to understand with whom you're going to peer and how, and understanding actually the needs of your network, understanding what type of an organization you are, where it does make sense to peer and when it doesn't make sense to peer. So we knew that there were a lot of resources out there, and a lot of the IXPs actually have a lot of information on their websites, but it's also difficult for a new entrant to sift through all that information. So how could we get that information in a useful way to these newcomers? And the idea there was the Peering Toolbox. So the idea is to have something that is by the community, but and provided by people who peer, but also by IXPs and those who develop materials, and really to provide a resource, a place where we have resources that people can use. And it was really to provide like a toolbox, a reference guide on best practice, how to meet IXP requirements, how to meet other peers requirements, and how to get the most out of peering. So we didn't want to duplicate any of the work out there, because there is a lot of good work and good information out there. We also didn't want to create a peering Bible, the ultimate handbook, because there is no such thing, because again, it really depends on your network and your needs. But we wanted to gather all this in a useful way. So first of all, I'd like to say, if you are an organization that has developed a lot of material like that and you'd like to share it, then get in touch with us and we can link to your materials. But also, if you're someone who wants to learn more about peering, then stay tuned, because this is where we will be providing it. And we're incredibly thrilled to have hired Philip Smith as product manager. Philip has worked for at least 2 decades that I know, doing routing workshops, BGP, peering, networking, hands-on workshops all around the world, and particularly in developing countries, but really all over the world. And I'm very pleased to say that he was inducted into the Internet Hall of Fame in the last round as well. So it's an incredible honor to have him here, and he's got a lot of useful resources to draw from as well. So we'll be creating a learning structure. It will be broken down into smaller pieces so that you know where to start if you're a beginner, intermediate, or an expert, and you can more easily navigate and find the information that you need. And this is the website at the moment. Since we're starting this up, there's not much there, but the idea is that we'll start populating this as this work takes off. So that's really it. That was the idea with the Peering Toolbox, and we're incredibly excited to start this work. So I'll end my presentation and maybe we can jump into a discussion around this. Thank you.
Thank you, Nirani. Thank you for the introduction there. So I think now that you have all met Nirani, let's give some time for Nina and Donnell to introduce themselves, and then we will kick off the panel. So let's start with Nina.
And the first thing to learn is you need to unmute yourself if you want to communicate anything on Zoom. You would think that we've learned that now after 2 years of virtual life, but no. So hi everyone, I'm Nina. I have worked in the industry for the past 20 years, and most of that time I have been working with peering in one way or another. First, I was working at an incumbent ISP in Scandinavia, doing peering coordination backbone design, traffic management, all kinds of different things. But the one thing that I really loved was, taking care of the connectivity to the rest of the internet for that ISP. And then I moved on to working for Netflix and was working with partners and peering and embedding caches. And now I have moved on to a vendor on network observability, Kentic, where we basically provide systems where you can ask any question of your network, we will have the answer for you. So, and yeah, that's me. And I live in Denmark. I wish I was in South Africa right now because it's very rainy outside.
Well, we have also been experiencing some rain here in South Africa.
Okay.
So it's not been sunshine and beautiful days as much, but still very nice weather, I would think, compared to where you are. Now we can go over to Donnell.
Hello, everyone. My name is Donal Cunningham, and I'm a technical architect with HEANet, the Irish Network and Research, Education and Research Network. I've been working for HEANet for 5 years, but this is my second time through HEANet. I started my life as a Unix system administrator, and then I moved into networks about 20 years ago, worked for HEANet for a while, then moved out to the commercial world where I worked for 2 Irish ISPs, mostly looking after their ISP, their internet service provider network, but then came back to HEANet in 2016. These days I look after our external connectivity, connecting to internet exchanges and to the broader world. Also deal a lot with people internationally. Yesterday was dealing with people in Amsterdam, Montreal, and New York, this today, and then later on talking to Brazil. So it's an international world, and it's good to have an appreciation of the wider world because sometimes you'll end up talking with them. I live in Ireland, and I don't have as nice a background as Nina does with the lovely submarine cable map. But bless you all with your stories of rain in Ireland. The reason it's so green is that it rains so much. And the way you can tell that it's summer in Ireland is that the rain is warm. Over to you, Yolandi.
Oh, thank you for that. I'm sorry for laughing, but at least we know something about Ireland now. Thank you. Okay, cool. So let's kick off the panel discussion. So as Nurani mentioned, the Peering Toolbox is there for networks that are looking to peer or are already peering. So depending on what your skill level is or where you are with your peering journey, the Peering Toolbox is there to help you. But now, of course, this discussion will kick off by starting with, we need to connect, we need to peer. So the question I think we need to ask is, what is the business benefit of local interaction, and when should you start thinking about joining an IXP, to start that peering discussions and start that interconnection? So I'm going to shift this question to Donnell, and the panel is obviously welcome to join in on the discussion. So what is your take, Donnell, on this question? What is the business benefit?
Well, there are quite a few business benefits. The main one, I suppose, when you're starting off your journey is it's part of a community. You're going to typically, there are communities built around local groups, whether that's related to an internet exchange. And it's also about market perception, because you're going to be seen as local too. You're going to be exposed to new markets. You'll be exposed to new providers as well, because the kind of community that builds up around an internet exchange, for example, it'll tend to attract in people, suppliers, providers of everything from splicing services to equipment to support to logistics, because they see these markets as a nice target-rich environment, and they go where the buyers go. And in a lot of cases, for example, INEX, the Irish Internet Exchange, it's the only internet exchange on the island of Ireland. It's where you'll find an awful lot of senior network engineers and IT managers. So that's quite a good thing. And you're able to meet people who maybe have done what you want to do before, people who've worked with suppliers. There's a lot of recommendation and word of mouth, and your company name or your organizational name will ideally be in the mouths of others, and hopefully that's a good thing, and that you'll be spoken of well. A thing to remember as well is, particularly for things like internet exchanges, they often offer associate membership. So for organizations that wouldn't necessarily connect in per se, they might like to contribute to the community as well, and that can be quite useful for people. I see Narani smiling there. Did you want to come in there? The other thing,
I think it's the communities around the IXPs, that's actually what I enjoy the most. So that's why it put a smile on my face.
Yeah. The other thing it does is it can connect you either as an enterprise or as a service provider with other service providers. And this also, these could become suppliers to you in turn, or they could become people that you might work with on an alliance or work with on tenders or projects or other things like that. Another thing is the user experience. If you want to optimize the user experience, if you're a content provider, if you're someone who has information that you want to share with other people, you want to be as close to them as possible. There's a phrase that gets used mostly by technical people talking about eyeball networks. And eyeball networks are networks belonging to typically internet service providers that serve the residential or the business market, because from your content point of view, you want to try and reach as many eyeballs as possible. And that's why I can speak for INEX, a lot of the domestic and business internet providers all want to peer at the local internet exchange, and it's attractive for other people then, because that's where the users are. The flip side of that is, if you have end users yourself, if you're an enterprise or a service provider, you want to try and optimize the internet as much as possible. So the way to do that is to reduce latency, reduce the distance between you and other providers. And it's not just individual companies as well. It's things like if you want to go to the cloud providers. A lot of people think of Microsoft for their Windows updates or their Office updates, but it's also Azure. A lot of people think of Google for their searching needs, but on top of that, it's also GCP, their cloud product. A lot of people think of Amazon when they want to buy that one thing they've had their eye on for some time, but it's also AWS, their cloud offering. And it's also content providers and content distribution networks, people like Akamai or Limelight or Cloudflare, which people mightn't have heard of sort of 4 or 5 years ago, but now the names are kind of familiar in the back of your mind. And it's because, if you go back sort of 5 or 7 years, for the big example was Apple had their trailers site for doing movie trailers, and they used Akamai, so that when you downloaded a video and wanted to watch it, it came from somewhere much closer to you than, say, the West Coast of the United States, which is really a lovely place from which to get stuff if you're on the West Coast of the United States. But if you're just a little further afield, say Southern Africa, to pick a random example, then having that content, or a silo, a copy of that content close to you, makes the experience much snappier, much more responsive. And particularly given how users react to what they perceive as a slow website or slow downloads, if you want to optimize that experience for them, you need to get your content as close to them as possible. And again, things like internet exchanges, or even direct peering as well, because that's a possibility. A lot more people now are thinking about direct peering because they're thinking of direct connect, or they're thinking of, direct connections into Google or Amazon or Microsoft as well. Another idea is that if you're thinking, I have an internet connection, and that internet connection breaks someday, you're going to have an absolutely lovely day. It could be that you are no longer able to provide content to your customers. It could be that your office is disconnected. So from some people's point of view, they learn about peering and transit when they're trying to say, well, wouldn't it be nice to have 2 connections to the internet? And if one was having a bad day, because someone with a digger or a backhoe or a JCB, if you're in the UK or Ireland, decided to really mess up your day, that it would give you resilience. And that's very much worth having these days. There's an awful lot of people with diggers or backhoes or Kango hammers who seem to love digging up interesting parts of the fiber infrastructure where I live. And maybe it's the same where you are too. And in particular, one aspect that a lot of people love is if they get their own internet resources, they get their own IP addresses, it means they don't have to renumber every time they switch provider, which, believe me, as somebody who's had that pain, I would not wish this pain on any of you. And hopefully that answers the question about the business benefits. If anyone else on the panel wants to chip in, please be my guest.
I think you covered it quite a bit. I think there's at least there's a discussion often about the financial benefit as well. In some areas, it's debatable whether it's still a financial benefit or not. But then we have all the other good reasons. But definitely in areas where you have an internet exchange and you have maybe only some expensive transit, moving part of your traffic over to peering could be a way of saving money as well. And definitely it's been one part that has been driving the peering community and the peering business for many, many years. But with the transit prices, at least in some parts of the world, gone down a lot. It's a thing you can think about, but it's not something you can assume is just will be there right away because of the extra work, basically, and maybe also other other things you have to pay for, like the connectivity to the internet exchange and those kind of things. But for a lot of people, there will be a financial benefit too.
Particularly as well when you have, as you say, the expensive transit providers, or if you have pay-as-you-go internet or burst charges on your internet. In some cases, not all of them as well, your peering could be fixed cost in that, a fixed price to join the exchange, a fixed price to get a 1 gig, a 100 meg, 1 gig, 10 gig, 100 gig port. So in those cases as well, if essentially your internet, your peering connections are essentially fixed cost in that case, why wouldn't you want to drive as much traffic as you can over those to get the best use out of them?
I have a question, I think, that kind of goes into the business benefit. So my question would be, if I am a ISP or an enterprise, really doesn't matter. Well, more of the enterprises, financials, and retailers out there wanting to explore, the peering side of things. Would it be better for me to manage that network myself, so have an in-house networking team, or should I look at having a third party manage that network, that connectivity to the IXP?
So when you say talking about having a third party manage your peering network, that's buying transit. That's basically what buying transit is. So from my point of view, that would be the people who come around and sell transit, they are investing the money in making sure they have a good product. And a good transit product has very good connectivity also locally, because why would you buy from a provider in your local area if that provider did not have good connectivity to whatever you need to reach in that local area? So that's definitely a thing to take into account when you buy transit or you select your transit provider. So outsourcing to a third party who would then go and do your network and your peering, I would definitely compare the price of that with what it would take to just buy transit if I did not want to take care of it myself. It seems like you know, useless overhead from my point of view. But you know, because the assumption would be that your transit provider will have the redundancy and the resiliency, and you can pick two transit providers and you know, make sure that they are not running in the same and on the same network, and then you will have more resiliency as well.
I live on an island, and there are only a certain number of fiber routes in and out. So sometimes it's a question of, if you want to go for resiliency, if you want to control your own destiny, then if you have the control, you can say, well, who's using which route to get out of my country, and who's using the same subsea fibers, who's using the same terrestrial links, whether they're radio or fiber. It comes down to as well, are you handing control as well as operational authority to a third-party provider? And in some cases, for an organization, the right answer is yes, I do wish to do that. And I wish to have a single point of call. I may not have some of the technical knowledge in-house, whereas others may say, no, I want to, this is important enough to me that I want to bring it in-house. I want to do it ourselves. And if you have technical people in-house with the benefit of some learning and things like the peering toolbox, it is quite achievable.
So to add to that, I would just like to say, it depends, right? It depends. And it's very difficult to give a yes or no answer, because it depends on where you are, what your connectivity options are, if there are good exchange points nearby, what your transit provider services look like, if they're high quality, if they're expensive, what competence you have internally, you know, all those factors come into play. So I think it's very difficult to say these types of organizations should have this peering strategy and these types of organizations should have this peering strategy, because there are a lot more factors that come into play, right? So that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges for any peering network, to really figure out what your needs are, what is my organization's peering needs, what can I benefit from by peering or by doing private interconnection or transit, and in many cases it's a mix of both. It's not either or. You fine-tune constantly to optimize for your needs.
So, I mean, we have so many new networks joining the peering community. As you guys mentioned, 20 years ago, it was a different landscape in terms of IXPs and when it all started. So I think I have a question for Nurani from Internet Exchange point of view, is what challenges have you seen with peers joining the IXP in general?
Well, so I think, I mean, first of all, I do want to debunk the myth that all sort of the traditional networks know what they're doing, because that was one thing that surprised me actually when I started working for an exchange point many years ago, that even some of the more experienced networks didn't actually seem to always know what they were doing. So there was a lot of education that happened even then. But I think the absolute biggest challenge for anyone who comes into peering now, it's actually that there's no magic bullet. You know, it's not, if you join an exchange point, everything will be, you know, will be cheaper or faster, or if I start peering, everything will be, you know, better. And I see a lot of newcomers join an exchange point and think that just by connecting, it will just fall into place. So the biggest challenge there is coming back to what I was saying about understanding your network and what type of organization you are, who am I trying to reach, and where does it make sense to exchange that traffic? So, I mean, I think some people in the chat mentioned root servers, and I think root servers can be incredibly helpful for newcomers who just come onto the exchange. But it depends. It doesn't fit everyone, right? So I think the biggest challenge is, okay, so I'm at the exchange point. What do I do now? And then, looking at where your traffic goes, what paths it takes, what do I pay for it? But then there's this whole other side also. If I'm going to, put a POP somewhere, that a lot of other costs that have nothing to do with the ports on the IXPs, but the data center, the colo costs, and the transport there, etc. So understanding that whole part is also quite tricky. And personally, having been in the exchange point world for so long, I love the community around the IXPs, and I love the peering forums, and because I think it's amazing that we have this sort of, I think it's quite a special community in many ways in this corner of the internet. But I can also completely understand that if you're an enterprise network and you've decided to peer, to all of a sudden then not only have to hire people to do this and manage this and get the right tools to analyze your network and understand the cost and put together business cases, you then also have to send this person to like a peering forum on the other side of the world. It's quite a new, the challenge for those types of networks. And I do think there are a lot more tools available now than 10 years ago even, and we're also getting better at doing business, not just at these forums. But I think that's I can understand that that's very steep learning curve for new networks.
I think what you said, Nurani, about joining the peering conferences and events, it is quite important. I mean, that's kind of what Peering Toolbox is built on, is discussing all these challenges and strategies of what I want to achieve, what I want to do. So it's nice to have a community where you can sit down and have these discussions with different networks in different parts of the world to understand, how should I be looking at my network? What should I be looking for in my network? It's also, I think another question I have is, so we talked about joining the IXP, the challenges. I think the first challenge would be, how do you choose which IXP to connect to? What should I be looking for when deciding which IXP locally or close by should I be connecting to? That's a difficult one.
As one who have selected many IXPs throughout the years, I would be happy to jump in here, because this comes down to understanding what it is, what kind of traffic you need to attract, right? So are you looking for offloading some content you have? Then you need to find the internet exchanges where the networks that are the destinations for that traffic are present. Or if you are, on the other hand, you're looking for content, that you have a lot of content coming in to your customers, or you have very critical applications running in cloud, then you go and you look for the IXPs where you can find that content. So I think that would be the criteria number one. Like, who is there? Who is there? Well, first of all, criteria number 0 is understanding your own needs. And then criteria number 1 is who is there? And then the next step in the process could be, how important is my connectivity to these particular networks? And do I need maybe to connect to more than one location, either geographically or logically, to make sure that I always have the connectivity that I need? So that's kind of the start of your analysis, I think. But the first start is, we go back to the business benefit we talked about earlier, understanding what is your needs. Is it more resiliency? Is it access to end users? Is it access to content?
Okay, thanks for that insight. I'm sure you have had very difficult decisions in finding IXPs to connect to. So Narani, you mentioned resources again. A few years ago, it was difficult to find. It's not something you just type in, there you go. So what, apart from Peering Toolbox that we are trying to put it all together for our community, what other resources can we look at? How do we find these resources?
Well, I mean, obviously you've got Peering DB and IXPDB that we'll be talking about later, and then there are all sorts of other tools. But if you don't mind, I might actually throw that at Nina, because I think, first of all, Nina works for an organization that develops these types of tools, right? So she's an expert, but also in that she's the one who's been using these tools in previous roles to figure out the needs of our network. Is that all right if I throw that at you, Nina?
Absolutely. So, well, I think there are two things that we have to think about, or you have to think about when you start going out. One is actually understanding all the vocabulary that's running around. And here, one of the ideas for the toolbox is to make sure that we can point people to the right sources for that vocabulary, because we're all the providers of anything peering related out there are writing up our own definitions on what is peering, what is BTP. You go to a BTP class and maybe what you're taught is, how to run your internal BTP in your network. And what you really wanted to learn was, how is the internet built and how is BTP used there? So you don't have that particular specific knowledge. And there's so much information out there because we've all written it. I mean, I have presentations out there that goes back years. There are definitions on, and almost every IXP will have, this is peering, this is transit, this is BGP, and everybody who can do classes, or all of the amazing classes that's been given over the years, for one of them by Bill, who is now the project manager for this project. Phil, not Bill, are out there. And so how do you figure out which ones are the right ones to look at? And that is really difficult. And that's one of the reasons why I was so happy when I learned about this project of collecting the data and pointing to the resources that a group of people who might not agree on everything, but can find some sort of consensus about, that this is the good information. Because honestly, you can do a Google search on peering, and there's, you can sit down and cry to try and figure out. And it's the people with the smartest search words that gets the top. It's not necessarily the people that will give you the right information there. So there's not a good, well, the answer here is, come to that website once we're done with it, because that's the whole idea. We want to make sure that everybody gets the right information. And personally, my journey into this was some really good people who wanted to share their knowledge. So once we can start meeting in person again, I have learned so much about how to do traffic engineering, anything, just by drinking beers in a bar, with people who were willing to share what they knew, but also hanging on, the forums in the middle of the night, when I couldn't sleep, and then just asking questions to people who were willing to share. So, but that's not very structured. And if you're completely new and maybe started doing the peering in the past 2 years, where we haven't been able to go actually meet each other, it's difficult to ask that question to a random stranger. It's so much easier when you've met.
And having a beer.
So this will help. Coming to the meetings, but you don't have to travel to the other end of the world to learn about it, because almost anywhere in the world now we have the local events. Whenever there's an internet exchange, as Donald talked about, there's a community being built around it, and the community is often built by people who, like the people on this panel, who just love to talk about everything we've done all the time. And I will stop talking now because I'm rambling.
No, I want to jump in and actually plug one of Nina's talks, because when you were at Netflix, you gave a really good talk at APIF, I don't know, a couple of years ago, about peering negotiations, which I think was incredibly informative, even as someone who has been around for a little while, because it also highlighted this thing about, how that there might be some technical requirements that we as a network actually put on you before we, decide to peer with you or not. And it went through, I think, some of the tools as well. And so I'd recommend anyone actually who's interested to go back and look at that talk.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that input. I know that is something very dear to Nina's heart. It's discussing.
And I can talk more about the tools we need.
So talking about tools, Donnell, you are very quiet. So I'm going to throw a question to you. What tools do you use to help decide where to peer, and what are the key networks you want to reach? What do you use?
I'll just note that getting me to start talking isn't usually the problem, but I'm happy to
usually the other way around.
I'm happy to let other voices have their chance too, for once in my life. Starting off, I suppose, the main networks, as I said, it depends on your perspective. If you're a content provider and you want to reach people, then you need to think about, well, who are my customers and where do they live, both geographically and in terms of the network. So within Ireland, for example, I want to reach the incumbent ISP, the old Posts and Telegraphs, would you believe, is what they were known as until relatively recently. So they're the big fish in my pond. So I want to make sure I reach them. And then you say, well, the next one is the cable providers. And okay, yeah, that's a lot more eyeballs there. And then you want to get to the regional internet service providers as well. Okay, where are they going to be picked up? And then in terms of if I want to optimize my content path, then I suppose the biggest fish are probably the cloud providers. So the big three in that case, depending on whether you alphabetize or not, would be Azure, AWS, and GCP. But then also your content distribution networks, which are your Akamai, your Limelights, your Cloudflares. I think as particularly given discussion in recent years of I know this is going to come as a terrible surprise, but there are some very bad people on the internet these days. And in particular, things like DDoS attacks, and people are now hearing names like Cloudflare or Akamai or Limelight or others, where they wouldn't traditionally have heard them before, because now people are realizing it's not just about putting information up on the internet. Now you need to protect it from people who want to either steal it or refuse access to it completely. So typically, I suppose one of the first questions to think of is what kind of a provider am I? Whose experience am I trying to improve? And one thing that's very useful to know is, with whom do I exchange traffic? And in some case, if you just have one pipe, then typically that'll be that box over there with the blinky red light on it. That's the internet, as shown in a favorite sketch from the IT crowd many a time. That's the internet box. But when you start digging a little bit deeper and you decide you want to know more, in some cases, it's as simple as doing things like traceroute, or doing pings and traceroute. The venerable tools in our toolbox. They're like that grandfather's hammer that's 60 years old and has had the head replaced 3 times and the handle twice. Ping and traceroute will just let you see, where does my traffic flow? How do I get to this network? And the flip side of that is, sometimes if you want to see how the rest of the world sees you, then you might use a looking glass, which would allow you essentially to run pings and trace routes on other people's equipment, which turns out to be really useful, because the internet isn't like a mirror where whatever way you send something out is the way it will come back. It can frequently be asymmetric. So you need to have the perspective looking out and the perspective looking in. Sometimes it's as easy as just doing show route or the equivalent on your network devices. Sometimes it's just doing pings and trace routes. Some people like the command line. Some people like beautifully pastel colored web GUIs. Whatever works for you. We do not tech shame. Also, things like NetFlow or JFlow or SFlow are honestly, really at this stage, you can tack the word flow onto the end of a lot of things. But basically, it's a way of looking at your network, typically in summary view or sampling. So you're not looking at every single packet, but you're looking at, by sampling often enough, you're looking at a statistically significant, isn't that the phrase? You want to look at a statistically significant amount of your traffic and say, well, I seem to be exchanging an awful lot of traffic with the incumbent ISP in my country. So that makes you think, well, how do I optimize that path? Maybe I'm 3 hops away from them at the moment. How do I reduce that to 2 hop or 1 hop? It can also be telemetry as well. I mean, you can do a lot with things like SNMP, but you can also look at a tool that's getting much more popular these days, streaming telemetry. And you'll get people these days, particularly in the world with Docker or VirtualBox, you can spin up a stack that's using to handle your streaming telemetry, a TIG stack, which is named for the tools Telegraph, InfluxDB, Grafana. And I'm name dropping again, and I should stop. So that you can look at your traffic and say, well, who do I exchange traffic with? Where does it go? You can outsource it. And I'm keenly aware that Nina works for a company that would be more than happy to help you look at some of that information and present it in beautiful multicolored graphs, so that you get a feel for where does your traffic go. And for example, on Patch Wednesday, you may find an awful lot of your traffic is coming from Microsoft. And some days you'll even find that it's not coming directly from Microsoft, it's coming from one of the content distribution networks instead, which is how I find out about content distribution networks many, many years ago. You've also got things like PeeringDB. PeeringDB is a lovely tool, much time for it. And I'm very biased because I've been involved with it for a long time. It tells you who peers where. What speed, what kind of connectivity do they have? Do they do private peering? Do they do open peering? What autonomous systems do they use? Is it open peering, or are they a little bit pickier about who they pair with? Typically for some of the larger networks, not thinking of any large European cable provider in particular, they will say, we will pair with you, but only when you're doing this much traffic with us. And it also often gives you a direct connection point to the people who deal with peering in an organization. It's, you know, for a smaller organization, you know, sending an email into NOC will be fine. But if you're trying to contact someone in Microsoft to talk about peering, Microsoft's kind of big. You know, there's a lot of people who work for them. How do you know who the best people to talk to are? And often the answer is you look them up in peering DB and you'll find that there's a peering at insertnamehere.com. And you're like, ooh, that might be a better email address to use for that. There are other tools as well, like the databases of the regional internet registries, like Afrinic or RIPE or ARIN. And often there's a lot of useful information in there. You could look up networks in there, and it will often say, again, it will give you information about who some of the technical contacts are. Just bear in mind that, you know, some of the information can be a little bit stale, but it's still a good place to go looking. And there are tools like RipeStat, which is stat.ripe.net for anybody who wants to go and have a look at it. The looking glasses I mentioned earlier are very useful when you want to see what the perspective of the outside world looking at you is, particularly when you're peering, because ideally what you want to see is that a random network the far side of the world says, I see two paths to your network, one over your primary provider and one over your secondary provider. And that's a good thing to see. And often you can look at the information that comes back and says, well, why is all of the information going over my secondary path instead of my primary? And tools like this are very useful for that. And if you haven't had a look at the wonderful tool called BG Play, this lets you see how networks are connected to each other. If you look up AS1213, which is HENet, where I work, you'll see, for example, that we're connected. The graph will show you that we're connected to GTT and Lumen, who are our transit providers, but we're also connected to GÉANT, the European Education and Research Federation, and connected to other people at internet exchanges as well. They're the main tools I'd use. Nurani, Nina, Mani Jalandi, what tools do you use and how useful do you find them?
So, well, I use, and I have used everything that you talk about.
I feel better now.
For the information that you were talking about, you would get in BDP Play or BG Play. I used to use a tool that unfortunately is not there anymore, but it might come back. But that was the market intelligence tool from Renesys back in the day. That I think most of us old timers remember when it came there and remember all the uses that we have used with it, because it was a place where you could basically go in and you could see information about a network, who were their providers, who were their peers, who were their customers. And you could see what markets they were active in. And for those people who were interested in some sort of kind of ranking, there was a ranking there. I honestly, I sometimes go around and say that I built my career on that tool. It was definitely one of those that I've been using a lot. And yeah, old timers, Andrew. But, you know, it is useful and it can be difficult today, you know, to figure out who is connected, in particular, how they're connected. I mean, there are a lot of resources out there showing, you know, that there is a BGP edge, there is a connection between them, but it's difficult for you to figure out whether it's one where your traffic can run on, and what kind of relationship do you need to have with the other parties to make sure that the traffic runs on that. So that was one I wanted to throw in there. I also want to talk a little bit more about flow, because you talked about the flow it's a great tool. It really is. Flow, when you marry it with other information that you have in your network is even better. And you can do that yourself. You have some great engineers. You can collect the flow, you can collect the BTP routes, you can make sure that it all gets together so you understand a bit more about the path that the traffic took coming to your network, because that information will not be in the flow packets if you're just collecting flow and looking at that data alone. Or you can, as your need might grow, you might want to use tools such as the one that we sell or others from our competitors where that is what the tool does. Because it's not just collecting the flow can give you a lot of information you don't know what to do with. But collecting the flow and knowing which other information to compare it with or to combine it with will give you the usual information. So I'd like to put a little bit of a warning about, oh, I'll start collecting flow and I throw it into Kibana, and then I will know everything I need to know. You might be a little bit disappointed and you put a lot of effort into a lot of work. So I think maybe I'm a little bit inspired by a question that came in the Q&A. So I think we should, in our tool, in the toolbox, have a focus area on flow, on where do you want to go, and again, what are your needs from flow? Do you need just to know which AS the traffic originally comes from, or do you need to know the route to you, and do you need to know how you can get it if you can't get a direct connection, because it might come from somebody who is not in your local area. So there are a lot of questions there. I think I see coming up now as well another tool that is testing. Today, people are so focused not just on having a good network, and then maybe you understand the destinations of your users' traffic, or maybe you do not, or the origins. But people today tend to switch providers and switch networks really fast. So monitoring the services that are running on your network is becoming a thing, I believe, for also for the people who takes care of the connectivity. So that's a thing to maybe for the future for people to think about. Is there a way? Do we want to make sure that our applications are running correctly, and what can we do for those? It's a new area that's kind of coming up in our area, so I just want to throw it out there that after you've learned everything else that we have talked about today, that might be the next thing you want to dig into.
I think on that, Nina, now that I've discovered who I need to peer with or need to connect to, what do I do when a network does not want to peer with me?
Yeah, I have good stories about that. So because that's the thing, and that was one of Donald also mentioned, that was one of the important information you get from PeeringDB is, how likely is it that a network want to peer with you? So what is their peering policy? You have to remember when you have an open peering policy, these people will mostly also be on the route server, and you will, if you ask for a direct session, you'll probably get a yes, and everybody will be happy and we can move on with our lives. But sometimes you get a no, and you might be confused about what's going on here. And then you have to go look at the peering policy. And a peering policy, when it's written down and made public, it is not, some people confuse it sometimes with the requirements for peering. But in reality, it is, here are my reasons for saying no. So whenever companies need to write down a peering policy, they are writing down the reasons to say no. And they may have some business, some business opportunity, some business requirements that means that they will say no. And your job as a peering coordinator is to understand what are those reasons. So you can read the document, you can talk to them, and you can understand. And when you understand why they want to say no, maybe you can also find the path for them to say yes. One very, very common reason to say no is that the network is already have your traffic where they want your traffic. It could be that traffic is part of a ratio balance with one of their peers that will be more important for them than you. And removing your traffic and putting that on a direct path to you might then make their ratio balance difficult with that existing peer. So also, maybe they just want to sell transit to you, and why would they connect to you for free? So all of these, again, it's understanding your own business, but it's also understanding the networks you want to pair with their business in order to find that sweet spot where it is a benefit for both of you. And that takes a little research, and it takes tools, and it takes conversations with the people in the networks or with others who have dealt with them. Sometimes as well, you'll find that someone you want to directly peer with says, I'm on the root servers. If you peer with the root servers, you'll get my roots away with you. But the flip side of that is sometimes networks will say, I send most of my roots to the routing servers, but there are a couple of routes that you'll only get if you direct peer with me. This doesn't mean you won't learn those routes from anywhere else on the internet. It just means that if you want to learn them at a specific exchange, sometimes for, as Nina has said, their own reasons, and sometimes it's just operational simplicity. If somebody says, I'm peering with the root servers, that will get 99% of people. And if anyone comes to me looking for direct peering, they'd want to be one of FANG, otherwise I'll point at the root servers and go, look, a root server over there. And I think there's one thing also to understand, that this is all business, right? It's not personal. And, don't be offended or angry if you continue to ask somebody and they don't, they keep saying no. I had a funny experience once when I moved from a restrictive network that was going no, over to a content provider who was the one asking, hey, come here with me. And I got a decline on one of my requests, and I realized that decline was a copy of a decline that I had sent out to that particular network in my previous role, just with the names checked in. I mean, it was a good sense of humor, but it was also a little bit, this person was, sort of like, I'll give you that one back, And,
I think that's
good fun, but it also illustrates, it's not personal. It's always, there's a business reason behind it.
I think that's such a good point, though, but also not just understanding your own network needs, but the network you're talking to as well. And just to add to, some of the technical tools that have been mentioned, I always recommend also, if someone's going after to try to establish peering with someone, go to their website, figure out what their plans are, figure out where they are, and understand their peering policy. Not just that it's restrictive or it's open, but what is it? And sometimes when it's, when it's not open, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are super restrictive. It just means that they want you to fulfill these criteria. And understanding that, I think, is really, then you can have a more informed discussion. But then one of the things that we discussed a little bit also when preparing for this panel was, I think Nina touched upon how incredibly useful the forums are, both because, and it's the same goes for me, I have learned so much from others just by going to forums, listening to their presentations, but then also asking questions to those more experienced. And some of the tools might be difficult to really, get your head around. You might understand what it does, but then you might not understand how do I use it. So it works for me. And using your peers in the community is actually incredibly powerful there. And I think, coming back to Nina's story, I think at least the moral of the story there for me is that, if you're someone who goes to the peering forums and you do all that, whether you separate the personal from the professional, but always be nice. Always be nice. That's my advice. Whether you work for a restrictive or selective or an open peering policy organization, I think what I've been fascinated by working in this industry for so long is that there are technical reasons and there are business reasons, but there's a lot of personal reasons that come in, whether you want it or not. You need to know when to separate those things. But also, I think if you are someone who has always been approachable and friendly and tried to help others, you'll get that back in the community. And when you shift from an organization to another, you will, people will treat you well and share information as well, and business intelligence and all sorts of things like that with you.
There's a huge benefit to being part of a community, and as you get to know people, and as other people get to know you, you'll even be able to talk to other people and say, hey, I was trying to establish a peering with so and so, and they'll say, yeah, there's a good reason for that. You have the inside track, you have knowledge, and people, it's kind of an old saw to say that the human meaning of networking is in many cases more important than the technical part of networking, because humans are social creatures and we make links with people, not just to networks. And those connections, the kind of connections you'll meet by going to your local internet exchange meetup or attending a field day or anything like that, these are the kind of connections which will bind you. And I would argue, speaking as someone literally in the middle of my career, I turned 50 last year, that I nearly wish I'd put as much effort early on into establishing the human connections as I did the network connections. And it's certainly something for anyone at a networking career, particularly relating to peering. It will bring tenfold results. Absolutely worth doing. And on more than one occasion, knowing someone has resulted, I can't guarantee it, but knowing someone and being a known person myself has resulted in, yeah, we do restrictive peering, but we'll peer with, I'll talk to Jenny and see if we can peer with you. And sometimes it's literally come down to that. It's the personal connection, it's the personal touch. And even just an offhand comment from someone, turns at the next meeting into a plan, turns at the following meeting into, hey, things are connected. So yeah, absolutely, the social, the personal side of networking, absolutely well worth working on that as well.
Well, I think while we're touching on the human aspect of networking, I'm going to give you all a 5-minute breather. And then when we come back, we have Leo, who will briefly touch on Peering DB as well as IXP DB, which are tools you can use to see where to peer, how to peer, who to peer, and all those kinds of questions. So let's take a 5-minute break and then we will be back. We are back. Thank you all for sticking around with us. We are now going into the last little bit of our session. Thank you to the panelists for the panel discussion. I think it was very informative, very interesting. And I believe there should be a lot of questions after this session, which will help our community grow and help those in the peering community to further themselves, depending on where they are on their peering journey. So for now, we're going over to Leo, who will be presenting on Peering DB for us. So Leo, if you will take the floor.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. So here we are with a Peering DB update, and I'm going to focus on what we delivered for Peering DB users in features last year. But I'm going to quickly give a refresher for people who are new on what Peering DB is. So as has been mentioned, Peering DB is a place where you can find other people who are interested in peering. I like to think of it as a bit like a dating site for networks, with the difference being that on the whole, you probably want to connect with multiple partners. It's also a source of configuration information for many networks. And because it's a source of configuration information, that means lots of networks will go and look at Peering DB in an automated fashion every day, and they'll go and update their configuration. So one of the really big improvements we delivered last year was search and export. You can see on the right, we've got some configurable search stuff there. You can now search for interconnection facilities based on a radius from an address. You can do that in kilometers or miles. When you find those facilities, you can filter them by all sorts of things, like whether the property is owned or leased, and the kinds of power that are available. And you can see that there's those buttons for JSON and CSV. You can go and export that data. So you can go and take it into whatever your internal tools are so that you can make best use of it. We also recognize that a lot of people didn't really know how to use Peering DB. One of the things we're trying to do is, in presentations like this, is just let people know, hey, we have a feature like that exporting data, because people were asking for features that already existed when we did our user survey. And that tells us that actually we're not communicating as well as we need to. We started addressing that with how-to documents. They're relatively short, and they go and tell you how to do things like get started, manage user permissions. It's not shown on this screenshot, but we have a how-to now for search, which not only gives users information about how to get the best out of web search, but also the API. And so if you are new to the API, you want to automate something and you don't know how, that's going to help you get started. We've also got, let's see a chat message. So we've also got a development environment. Users can develop for Peering DB if they want. And if there's a feature that you want, you can go and say, hey, I'd like this feature and I'm going to write the code for it. And we have an OAuth service, which allows you to authenticate with Peering DB and then use that to do things like request peering with other networks. Someone wanted to extend that, and they did that. We introduced it in the code. We now have more with that. We also introduced organizational API keys. This allows organizations to associate their authentication with the organization itself and not the user individual, so that when users change roles and perhaps remove their Peering DB account, things don't just stop working. So those are some of the important things. And if there are any questions, then obviously I'm happy to answer them. But if you want to contact me directly, that's my contact information there. I'm always very happy to listen to what people want as a feature. and we can do our best to add that in. So thank you. Oh, I see there's 2 Q&As. Okay, how do I get my mouse back? There we go.
I think it's also important to highlight to our community that a lot of networks in their peering policy, it's actually a requirement to have a peering DB record in order for them to peer with you. So we do recommend having or suggest having a peering DB record and updating it or populating as much information as you can regarding your network, as there are some networks that require you to have a peering DB record. And as Leo mentioned, the users do get approved. So it's not like we are, or they are allowing just anyone to get all the information. I mean, like contact information. I know that is a big concern to most companies, is if I put down an email address, will everyone then start spamming me? Fortunately, PeeringDB tries to keep it to networking people, so that it's only networking people that will contact you from PeeringDB. But looking at the Q&A, Leo, the question we have here is how is it taking long to approve the logins? You always see the pending. Is there any requirement in creating accounts on PeeringDB?
You can create a login basically dynamically. You just go and you just create it. The issue is associating your login with an organization, and it is up to the administrator for your organization whether they're going to approve your request to give you permissions. And actually, one of those how-tos was how to manage permissions. And that was inspired by a conversation with someone at an organization who said, I've got all of these users affiliated with my organization, and sometimes they create stuff and I don't want them to, and I don't know how to manage that. And so we've gone and created a how-to guide on how to manage permissions. And I think one of the things is really important communication within the organization on who does stuff. If PeeringDB itself is getting in the way, then please either write to support@peeringdb.com or just write to me, and we will do our best to fix problems. We're not perfect, and it's important that people let us know if there is a problem so that we can address it.
What is the status of clustered facilities in PeeringDB? For example, a building that has 2 or more colos by different telcos on different floors.
We've recently published some guidelines for the admission or the listing of facilities in PeeringDB. We recognize that these are not perfect, and one of the key elements for those guidelines is to put a learning path. So you go and put in your request, and you can have a facility within a facility, and there's a whole series of routes for getting your facility listed. What I would say is go and take a look at the blog where we have a link to the guidelines. The guidelines are definitely being reviewed actively as we see more stuff coming in. And this is another example of, if you have a legitimate facility and for whatever reason it's not being listed, please let us know, because that means our guidelines need to improve. It doesn't mean that your facility shouldn't be listed.
Then we have hello, SOX or SOX. I guess 13004 is both registered as network and as an IXP. Is it necessary if an IXP such as SOX is present in 3 countries?
Generally, if you are running an IXP that is serving a distinct geographical area, you'd probably want to have a separate IX entry in PeeringDB for each of those IXPs. And if the IXP itself has an AS number and it peers, perhaps with its members, then you'd want to have an entry for that. And I think this is a place where having a chat with other IXPs about what they do is a really good idea. You can go and organize your PeeringDB entries in the way that makes most sense to you, and working out the way that makes most sense to you is something that you might want to discuss with peers who operate IXPs elsewhere in your country or elsewhere in the world.
Okay, and then Richard asked that you please share your email address again.
Yes, I will put it in the chat for everyone. It's leo@peeringdb.com.
Awesome. So that is the end of our session today. I'd like to thank all our panelists for joining us, for contributing, for sharing their knowledge with us. I think it was very useful. It was very interesting and always a pleasure to work with you all. And to our attendees, thank you all so much for joining. We really appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session. So thank you again, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Bye.